Yo, what's going on everybody? This is Rocklan here and welcome back to a brand new video. Today I'm going to be going over the basics to using Adobe Premiere Pro for making gaming montages, because I've made a ton of Premiere Pro tutorials and I've realised I've never actually covered the basics. I wanted to make this video for people who are new to editing, new to Premiere Pro and want to get into making gaming montages. Just before we get started, I've noticed a lot of you are not actually subscribed, so if that is you and you're not subscribed, scroll down the page, hit subscribe, like the video while you're down there, as well as join my Discord. We recently revamped it and we've got a great community over there, and follow me on my social media. The links will be down in the description. If you're new here and you do like this tutorial, I urge you to go and check out my channel, where you'll find loads of other gaming montage editing tutorials to help you use the skills you learn in this video to make great edits. But without any further ado, let's get into the basics of Adobe Premiere Pro. So once you've downloaded Premiere Pro, it should be here under installed in your Creative Cloud desktop. You can pin it to your taskbar, start menu, put it on your desktop, wherever you want. I tend to just open it through this. As you can see, it says I do have an update available. I should probably do that, but I'm not going to for the sake of this tutorial. I would urge you to do that though, as they do add a lot of cool features like accelerated GPU rendering and things like that, which is just going to speed up your workflow. So I'll definitely be doing that after the video. Also, when you download Premiere Pro, it should automatically install Adobe Media Encoder. If it doesn't, I recommend you download that as well, as it is a very handy piece of software to use alongside Premiere Pro. And let's get started by opening it up. Okay, so when you open Adobe Premiere Pro, you should be greeted by a home screen like this. Here in the middle, you'll see all your recent projects. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you wouldn't have any there, so I wouldn't worry about that. Pretty much the only thing here we're interested in is the new project button. So let's click that and you'll see it will present us with this new project window. Here you'll be able to give your project a name, so name it something you're going to remember. So I'm going to call this Premiere Pro Basics Tutorial, and you're going to choose a location that you want to save it. So I'm going to save it in this folder called Premiere Pro Basics. And then here are your project settings. Typically you wouldn't have to change anything, as it should automatically pick the best settings for you. However, if your renderer here is set to Mercury Playback Engine software only, and you do have another option like CUDA, I'm not sure if there's a version for AMD GPUs or not, but for me I have a RTX 3090, so I have the option to use CUDA. So you're going to make sure you select any GPU options, as it's going to accelerate both rendering and previewing in the viewport. Under video and display format, you can use timecode or frames. I wouldn't recommend using either of these for gameplay. I'm going to leave mine on timecode. Audio, leave as samples. Capture is DV, that's fine. And everything else here you can leave the same. Under scratch disks, you're going to want to make sure that this is on an SSD. So mine is all set to same as project, and I do have my project saved on an SSD, so that's fine. I would urge you to save your project on an SSD as well if you have the space available for it. Having your scratch disk and project on an SSD is going to make editing much smoother and quicker. And under ingest settings, I wouldn't even touch any of these. So as long as you've got some form of GPU acceleration selected and your scratch disk is on an SSD, then hit OK. And most likely it's going to open you onto a screen like this. You might be on the Learning tab, in which case come over to editing and you'll be presented with a screen that looks just like this. Now before we start anything, there's a couple more settings you want to make sure you've got right. These settings will save for every project, so you won't have to go and do this every time, but just initially when you set it up, you should come up to Edit, Preferences, General, and here you'll be presented with the Preferences window. You can go through all of these individually and mess around with them to your heart's content. The most important ones I'm going to say are under audio hardware. You're going to want to make sure that your input and output devices are set properly so you can actually hear what you're editing, and if you need to record a voiceover or anything like that, you have a microphone available. And you're also going to want to come down to memory. Make sure you have a good amount of RAM dedicated to Premiere Pro. Now you're going to want to set this according to how much RAM you have. So in my case I have 32 gigabytes, so I've allocated 4. This is how many gigabytes of RAM are available for the rest of my computer. So if you have a lot of stuff running in the background, which I recommend you not to do anyway, because it's going to slow down the program. But if you do for some reason need to have a lot of stuff open, then you might want to increase this number. Because I have 32, I can afford to put 4. If you have less than me, I would go as low as 2 gigabytes and just keep background applications closed. But I wouldn't go any lower than 2. So for me, 4 is okay. If you have say 8 gigs, 16 gigs, I'd go with 2. And just make sure you don't have too many programs open up in the background. The more RAM you can allow Premiere Pro to use, the faster it's going to be, the smoother it's going to be, the less likely it's going to be to crash, and it's just going to all round be a more enjoyable experience. Then under optimized rendering, you have performance or memory. So performance is going to use as much RAM as possible in favor of performance. However, if you're running a system with say 4 to maybe 8 gigs of RAM, you'll probably want to stick this on memory if you run into any issues. But if you don't run into any issues, leave it on performance. And now we're ready to start editing. So I'll give you a quick overview of the workspace. So over here you have your project bin. This is where you're going to put all of your video clips, audio clips, images, adjustment layers, anything like that. Here is where your sequence is going to be, or your timeline. That's where you can arrange your clips and add effects and things like that. In the middle here is your toolbar. So you've got your selection tools, your tracking tools, pen tools, type tools, hand tools, razor tool. This is probably the most important tool out of them all, the razor tool. And in this window up here is going to be where your preview is. So whilst you're editing, this is where you're going to see exactly what you're editing, a preview of your edit. And on this side, you have various options. So effect controls for changing the settings of the effects you've applied. And in the source, you'll be able to preview and cut down clips before you add them to your timeline. Up the top, you'll see the different tabs. You have editing, color, effects, audio, graphics, captions, and libraries. Personally, the only three I ever use are editing, color, and effects. For gaming montages, pretty much you're going to be in the effects tab the whole time, which looks pretty similar to the original editing tab, except you have an effects window over here and a few other options as well, which just makes it easier when you want to add effects to your clips, which is pretty much what you're going to be doing the whole time when it comes to gaming montages. One more thing you'll probably want to change before you even start editing is the keyboard shortcuts. Under Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts. Here you can see what every single key does. And for me, the three most important keys here are C, X, and Q. So I have C as Add Edit, X as Ripple Delete, and Q as Ripple Trim Edit to Playhead. These are the three keys I use the most. I don't believe they're set up like this by default. So if you want to just add those commands to these keys, you can just search them over here. So add edit, for example, and you can change the keybind here. These three are the most important in my opinion. The rest you can pretty much leave stock. Now to import a clip for editing, you can either come up to File, Import, and click that and browse that way. Or what I tend to do is just open my file explorer, go to my videos, find a video, grab it and drop it into my project bin. You'll see it will now be imported just like that. If you can't drag and drop, obviously just use the file import method. When you're importing clips into Premiere Pro, you're going to want to make sure that these clips are also on an SSD and not on a hard drive, unless of course you don't have the space on your SSD or you don't own an SSD. I do recommend you pick one up. The cheap SATA SSD is better than a mechanical hard drive and it's going to make editing much smoother. So if you can, keep your video clips on an SSD, even if you remove them off afterwards. It'll not only make previewing faster, it'll make the whole program more fluid and rendering even slightly quicker as well. Depending on the size of your monitor, you may not want to have all your clips in icon view, especially whilst you're in the effects tab. In the editing tab, the bin is slightly larger, so you can afford to do that. But under the effects tab, if you have a pretty small monitor, make sure you're zoomed all the way out if you can manage with that. Otherwise, just switch it to list view at the bottom and you'll be able to see all of the clips you've imported in a list like that. I'm going to leave mine on icon because I have a pretty large monitor. And if you want to at any time, Premiere Pro is extremely customizable. So if I want to make my timeline slightly smaller, I can do that, make my tools smaller, and I have a bigger bin now. So I'm probably going to leave mine. I'll make it a little bit smaller. There we go. Something like that. That looks good to me. Now we need to create a timeline, or what Premiere Pro calls a sequence, to edit our clip on. There's multiple ways of doing that. You can come up to File, New, and create a sequence up here, or use the shortcut Control N, or you can right click in the project bin, New Item, Sequence. When you open this window, you'll have lots of different settings here. Don't get overwhelmed, it's super easy. If you know what you're doing, you come over to Settings and you can customize this to suit your project. However, the simplest way to do this if you don't know what you're doing is to close out of this window, select your clip you want to edit, right click, and then hit New Sequence from Clip, and that will automatically create a sequence for you with the settings of your clip. And now you can see in our project bin we have the clip and we also have a sequence. You can identify the different types of media via the icons down here. So you can see this is the icon for a sequence and this is the icon for a movie clip. In the preview window, here are the scaling options. You can see currently it's selected on fit, which will fit the preview to the size of the dock that you've given it. So I can drag my timeline down slightly and make it bigger if I want to. I'm going to leave it just as it is though. And you have other zoom levels like 50%, 100%, whatever. I like to keep mine on fit pretty much all the time because I like to see the whole clip. And over here you have the preview resolution. So if your PC is not particularly powerful, I recommend dropping this down to half resolution. You'll see it more or less makes no difference because of how small the window here is. So there's really no reason why you should be running it at full ever really, unless you want to just because you can. I'm going to leave mine at half and that's going to make previewing smoother and faster. And now we can come down to the timeline. So on the timeline, we have this bar at the bottom, which will allow us to scrub along. You can grab the sides to zoom in or out. There's also a zoom tool over here. So you can click to zoom in, or if you hold Alt and click, it will zoom out. Here, each tool, if you hover over it, you can see the keyboard shortcut for it. So the selection tool is V. I recommend you learn these shortcuts and use them. It will make it much easier. I'm going to press V to get the selection tool back, and then that will allow me to drag clips around up and down and do pretty much whatever I want with them. Now this tool here, the razor tool, is arguably the most important tool, and you're going to want to get yourself familiar with this. This is the tool that's going to allow you to cut and split clips. So you can see this little red line. If I zoom in, you can see this little red line hovering over the clip wherever I put the tool. If I click with that, it's going to make a cut. I can then make another cut, press V to go back to the selection tool, select that clip and press delete, and you'll see now I can drag them together. They should automatically snap. If they don't, it means you've got the snap in timeline turned off, this little magnet up here. Click that, or you can use S on your keyboard to enable it and disable it. If you disable it, you'll just be able to place a clip over the top of another one, and that will also delete it, which you won't necessarily want. To undo anything, press Ctrl Z, and it will go back to how it was before you made any changes. So I'm going to keep pressing Ctrl Z until my clip is no longer split. And now, instead of using the razor tool, I'm going to use those keyboard shortcuts that we set up earlier. So that was C, X, and Q. So for me, I have C set as cut, so I have no need to use the razor tool. I can just press C and it will cut wherever the playhead is. And then I have X as ripple delete. So if I select this clip and hit delete normally, you see it will just disappear. Ctrl Z to undo. However, if I click it and press X now, which is set as ripple delete, it will delete and automatically snap this clip to my previous one, which doesn't seem like much, but when you're making hundreds of cuts, it definitely speeds up the process. If you want to do that even faster without having to make 2 individual cuts and then ripple deleting, what you can do is make 1 cut, and then we have Q set to ripple delete to previous edit or something like that. So if I press Q now, you'll see it's going to delete from where my playhead was, which was over here somewhere. It's going to cut from here and ripple delete back to here. So if I press Q, you see now we've cut, and we've done it in 1 key press instead of 2. So I'm going to Ctrl Z to undo that and zoom back out on my timeline. One more quick thing I'd like to cover is the way that positioning clips and tracks works. So you'll see here I've got the video clip and the audio connected because this is the audio that belongs to this clip. If I wanted to disconnect them for any reason, I can right click and hit unlink, and now you can see the video clip and the audio is separate. You can also select it and press Ctrl L, and that will do the same thing. The same as if you want to link a video clip and an audio clip together, select them, Ctrl L, and now you can see they're linked together. So you don't necessarily have to link a video clip with its original audio. You can pair it with whatever you like. Over here on the left hand side, you have the tracks. These eyeballs will toggle whether you can see it or not. So if I click this eyeball, you'll see the clip has now disappeared. So anything on this track will not be visible in the final edit. And you can do the same with audio tracks, except this is M button here, which is the mute track button. So that will then make it so that you can't hear the audio in that track. Of course, if I moved it to another track like this, I can now hear it because it is in this track, which is not muted. There's an option here for voiceover record, which is what I mentioned earlier with having your microphone selected. So if you do need to record a bit of voiceover, you can select that and it will automatically start recording, and hit it again to stop. I'm not going to do that because it's not really necessary for what we're doing. There's also an option to lock tracks. So if I lock the video track and the audio track, and now I try and cut, so if I get the razor tool, it will not let me clip it. If I press any of my keybinds, C, X, and Q, I can't make any edits to it whatsoever. If you've edited something on that track and you're happy with it and you don't want it to be affected by anything accidentally, lock those tracks, and then there's no risk of you accidentally editing them. To duplicate a clip, if you want to, you can hold Alt and then just drag from the clip and you'll see it will duplicate it. And now I'm going to unlink these, delete the audio, and you can see now I can position this clip on top of my previous clip and move it, say it back slightly, and you'll see whichever clip is on top is going to be the one that's visible. So if I drag my playhead, I'm currently viewing the bottom clip. As soon as I hit this second one, I'm now back at the beginning of the clip again, which you can see is here because I've just duplicated the same clip. So whatever clip is on top is going to be the one that is most visible. Now that's more or less it for the basics of the timeline. The same doesn't quite apply with audio tracks. If you have whichever one's on top is not going to be the only one that you can hear. They will all be played equally. However, you can adjust the volume up here in the under audio. You see the level in decibels. You can drag that down if you like, or drag it up to make it louder. Now it's time to start adding some effects. Now if you're editing a gaming montage, typically you're going to want to add some form of music, so I'm going to do that quickly. So I'm just going to drag and drop this song into my project bin, much the same as I would with an audio clip, and you can see that it has a different icon showing that it is only an audio clip and there's no video attached to it. I'm now going to drag that onto my timeline on a track just below my clip audio, which I'm actually going to mute because I don't want to hear that at the moment. I just want to hear the song. And now would be a good time to cover markers. So in Premiere Pro, you have the option to add markers to your clips. So I select this button up here, you'll see it's now added a marker. marker. So this has added a marker to my entire sequence. I can drag it along if I want to, and it's just useful for when you're zooming up and down to find a specific point that you're looking for. So maybe it's a beat of a song or a transition or something like that. Then you can right click on it and clear all markers or the selected marker. So I'm going to get rid of that. You can also add markers specifically to your clips. So if I scroll through to the point, I want to find a bit where I get a kill. So I'm going to say right here. So let's zoom in a little bit, and I get a kill right there. So now I'm going to select my clip and use the keyboard shortcut M to add a marker to the clip there. That way, no matter where I drag the clip, I will always have that marker associated with that point in time. Now what I want to do is line that marker up with my song so that I have a kill on the beat. So I'm going to hide my clip so I don't have to worry about it. And I'm going to just listen to the song and try and find where the beat is that I'm looking for. You can use the waveform down here. If you want to expand it so you can see the waveform easier, you can by hovering over and just dragging down, and you'll see that'll make the track much wider so you can see the waveform a bit easier, if that helps you. I'm just going to listen through and find the beat that I'm looking for. I think this is slightly too loud for me, so I'm going to just select it, come up to the levels, and I'm going to drag this down to, say, -10, and you'll see that it's added a little marker here called a keyframe, and we'll talk about those later. So I can see on my waveform that this right here is the beat that I'm looking for, so I'm going to hover over this, just in front of it, select the clip, and press M to add a marker. And now if I shrink my track back down, you see I've got a marker here, and I've also got a marker on my clip over here. So I'm going to grab the end of my clip and shrink it down so that I can then drag it over and line the markers up, and they should automatically snap. As you can see, it's snapping just like that. Perfect. So now my markers are lined up, and I'll drag the rest of this clip back out so it reaches the beginning of my sequence. So now if we listen, I should get the kill exactly on this beat right here, which you can see I definitely do. Now we're going to go about adding some effects to our clip. So what I'm going to do, and what is good practice, is you can directly add effects to the video clip itself. However, depending on which effects you're using and how many you're using, they can interfere with each other. So it's better to use a layered system with adjustment layers. So I'm going to come over to my project bin, right click, new item, and adjustment layer, or you can go up to file, new, adjustment layer as well. I'm going to click that. You want to make sure that the resolution matches your sequence. If you don't know what the resolution of your sequence is, come over to the sequence that I've got, right click on it, properties, and you'll see here is the exact resolution and frame rate. So 2560 by 1440 at 60 FPS. So I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. If adjustment layer isn't highlighted, you need to make sure you have your bin selected. So if I have this selected and hit file, new, there's no option. Make sure your bin is selected. File, new, adjustment layer, 2560 by 1440, and I want it at 60 FPS. Square pixels is absolutely fine, and I'm going to hit OK. And now you can see it's created a brand new adjustment layer, which is 5 seconds long by default. So I'm going to drag that onto my clip just above where I want my effects to be. So I want the effects on the kill, so I'm going to center it just over, and I can adjust the length of this adjustment layer later if I need to. What I recommend doing for kills and things like that is you want to add some form of impact. So what I'm going to do is come up to effects, and I'm going to add a brightness adjustment. So I'm going to search for brightness. If you don't want to search, you've got different options here. So you've got, your video effects. You can search for all of these. Some of these you might not have because I do have a lot of plugins, but I will only use effects that come preset with Premiere Pro during this tutorial. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to search brightness. So you'll see we've got under color correction, brightness and contrast. I'm going to grab that and drag and drop it onto my adjustment layer. And you'll see up here under effect controls on my adjustment layer, and you'll see the name of my sequence, adjustment layer, which is what I've got selected. I now have the option for brightness and contrast. Every clip and adjustment layer will automatically have these default parameters, so motion and opacity. I can close these down if it's easier, and then you'll be able to see brightness and contrast right there. You have a second timeline up here almost, which makes it a little bit easier when moving keyframes around, similar to how you would in After Effects rather than doing it on the timeline itself. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So I'm exactly on my marker of the kill, which I want to be, and I'm going to increase the brightness to a point that I'm happy with. So I'm going to start dragging with my mouse to a point where it's a brightness that I'm happy with. So I think about 100 looks good. You can also obviously click it and type in the number that you like. So if I wanted to type in say 30, I can do that rather than having to drag my mouse. So I'm going to set this back to 100 and click this stopwatch right here, which when you hover on it, it says toggle animation. When you click that, it will add a little diamond here, and that is called a keyframe. Essentially what a keyframe does is specifies at a point on the timeline how how an effect is going to behave. So we know where this keyframe is. There will be a brightness and contrast adjustment set to 100 brightness. Because this is the only keyframe on the clip, regardless of where I go in time, it will always be 100, which obviously we don't want. So I'm going to go 1 frame back. Whether you do it on this timeline up here or on this timeline down here, it makes no difference. I'm going to go 1 frame back, and I'm going to set the brightness back to 0. So you'll see anywhere before this keyframe it is 0, and then after this keyframe it's now 100. So I'm going to go a little bit after, maybe, you know, we'll go to about here maybe, and you'll see this timeline we've lost the playhead, so you're just going to want to scroll along until you find it. It's right there. Of course you can zoom in and out up here as well. So I found the playhead. I'm going to set my brightness back to 0. Now what's interesting about having the keyframes far apart, here you can see they're only 1 frame apart, so it goes from 0 to 100 straight away. Here, because they are far apart from each other, you have 100 here and 0 here. In between, Premiere Pro will automatically fade the brightness out. So it's gonna, if you watch this value here, as I drag the playhead, you'll see it slowly going down until it hits this keyframe where it is now 0. And you'll see that applies on the clip over here. So as I drag the playhead, it goes down to 0. So now if we play this, you'll see we'll get brightness on the kill and it will slowly fade out afterwards, just in time with the music. And that is essentially the basics to adding effects. I'm going to add a few more. So one that I like to do is a scale adjustment. So on my adjustment layer, I'm going to add a transform effect, distort transform. There is the option of transforming under motion, but this is the size of the adjustment layer itself and will not affect anything beneath. With the transform effect, it will affect whatever is below the adjustment layer. So you see if I drag this scale option here, it will zoom in and out the video clip below. So on my marker with my brightness at 100, as you can see is right here, I'm going to set my scale to 150 and you'll see that will zoom in the clip, and I'm going to hit the stopwatch to keyframe it, go back 1 frame, much the same as I did with the brightness, and set the scale back to 100. If you set it to 0 by accident, like with other effects, you'll see the scale will be 0, meaning the clip will no longer be visible. So 100 being 100%, it will take up 100% of its original resolution. I'm now going to go forward in time to where the brightness ends, which is there, and set my scale back to 100. So now you can see I've keyframed it back to 100%. If we watch the clip back, by the way, if you hadn't figured out already, there is the play button here, or you can press the space bar. You see it zooms in on the kill as well as getting brighter. There's one more effect that I'd like to add, and that is a blur. So I'm going to come up to effects and I'm going to search for blur. And under blur and sharpen, you will see different blur options. You probably won't have half of these blur options that I have because they are all plugins, but you will have blur and sharpen, camera blur, directional blur, Gaussian blur, reduce, interlace, flicker, sharpen, unsharp mask. For some reason I have 2. The one we're going to use is Gaussian blur. So I'm going to grab that and drag and drop it on my adjustment layer. And you'll see at the bottom of my effect controls is now Gaussian blur. So much the same as we did before on the marker where the kill and the beat is. I'm going to set my blurriness to something that I think 20, that'll do. Hit the stopwatch to keyframe it, go back 1 frame, set it back to 0, go forwards in time to the point where the rest of our effects disappear, which is right here, and set it back to 0. So you'll see now if we play it, it gets blurry, brighter, and zooms in. And there's one final effect that I'd like to add, which is going to actually apply before the kill, and that is lens distortion. So you're going to want to come up to effects and search for lens distortion. And if you scroll down to the bottom, we have under distort, lens distortion. I'm going to grab and drop that on my adjustment layer as well. Scroll down over here, see the lens distortion effect, and I'm going to do the opposite to these. So I'm going to, where I get the kill, I'm going to want it to be set to 0 instead. So I'm going to keyframe my curvature at 0, go back 1 frame, and I'm going to drag my curvature in something like that, minus 61, put it to 60, minus 60. And now we're going to go back, we're going to mute the audio clip below because otherwise it sounds like this. So I'm going to mute that temporarily. Go back in time to just as the scope comes up, I'm going to set the curvature back to 0. So you'll see now I've essentially done the opposite. Obviously it's not quite as long as these, but you'll see what effect that creates. And that's pretty much done with our effects for this particular kill. One cup for the night, got me fucked up. 2 bad bitches feeling right, I got dumb luck. So as you can see, I mute this, go through slowly, look up, lens distortion comes in and zooms in. Scale effect comes in with brightness and blur. and slowly zooms out back to normal. And you can essentially rinse and repeat these effects for every kill, add some variation. I have plenty of Premiere Pro tutorials. If you look on my channel for top 5 effects in Premiere Pro, you'll find 2 videos where I cover 5 effects in each, which come completely stock with After Effects, which are perfect for making montages. So you can incorporate those instead of the ones that I've shown in this video if you want to advance your edits a bit. And now the final thing we pretty much have to do is on our adjustment layer, you can see there's a lot of unnecessary space. So we're going to come to just before our first keyframe and drag our adjustment layer down and go just after our last keyframe and drag it down like that, and you'll see now our timeline is just filled with keyframes. It's just unnecessary to have this adjustment layer above any other clips. It'll just slow down rendering and just completely unnecessary. It looks better on the timeline as well, just like that. If you have any slowdown whilst editing in the preview, one thing you can do other than dropping your preview resolution is to render in to out. So if I put my playhead before the effects and I press I on my keyboard, that's going to set an in point, and I go to the end of where my effects are and I press O, that's going to set an out point. And now you'll see this highlighted section around where our effects are. So if this is slow, we can set this into out, come up to sequence, render effects into out. You'll see it's going to quickly run through this, render it out, and now you'll be able to play it completely smoothly if you weren't able to before. And then you can just right click, clear in and out, and you're back to your normal timeline. One more thing I'd just like to show you is creating and using presets. So if I come to my adjustment layer, you'll see I've got all these effects set up. Instead of having to do this every time, you can create a preset and then just drag and drop it on in future. So if I select brightness and contrast, hold control, select transform, Gaussian blur, and lens distortion, which are the 4 effects that I added, and I right click and hit save preset, I can now call this tutorial preset. And you have 3 options: scale, anchor to in point, anchor to out point. I recommend leaving it on scale. What that will do is use these keyframes and scale them to the size of the adjustment layer that you add them onto. Otherwise, anchor to in point and out point will keep them with the same timings. I recommend using scale, and then you can just alter the size of your adjustment layer depending on how long you want the effect to last for. Add a description if you want to describe exactly what's in it. I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to hit OK. And now if I come over here to effects under presets, you'll see I now have tutorial preset. If I drag a new adjustment layer back in, which you can see this adjustment layer has no effects on it, and I scale it down to a size that I'm happy with and drag and drop tutorial preset on it, I've now got all of my keyframes just like I had before, perfectly set up, so I can line this up with our next kill. So if I come to my adjustment layer, put them onto the keyframe where we get the kill supposedly, press M for the marker, so I know exactly where that is. Find when I get the next kill, which is right there. Drag it so that the marker lines up, and now if we play this through, you'll see I've now applied the same effects to 2 kills. And that will make editing much quicker and easier once you've created a bunch of different presets. Now that you're happy with your montage, you're going to want to render it. So you're going to want to find where the start of your montage is. So usually that would be at the beginning of your timeline. In my case, I don't want to start from the beginning. I want to start from just before the effects start. So I'm going to press I for my in point, and I'm going to go to the end of where I want my video to finish. And I'm going to press O for my out point. This is the only bit that I want to be in my final render. I don't want the rest of this because I haven't edited any of it. This is the only part that I want for my video. And now simply I'm going to come up to File, Export, Media, and you'll see it will bring up this window. Now you can configure your rendering options. So you'll see down here, source range sequence into out. I can do the entire sequence, which is about 2 odd minutes long, which I don't want. I just want it to be purely the part that I selected into out. So I'm going to make sure that's selected, and you'll see down here it's got the in and out points perfectly set for us. So we can do a quick preview to make sure we've got the right part. And then what you're going to want to do is come over to format. If this is for YouTube, you want H.264, preset of high bitrate, output name. This is where you can click and choose where you want to save it to. So I'm going to save it here, and I'm going to call it tutorial. Export video checked, export audio checked, that's what we want. I'm going to scroll down, make sure that your video settings are correct, so that is the resolution that I want. That is also the frame rate that I want. If it's not, tick it and make sure that it's set to how you want it. You want it to match the sequence you've been editing in. Because my PC can handle it, I like to tick render at maximum depth. If you have a low spec computer, don't bother doing that. Hardware encoding you want. If at the beginning you selected to use GPU acceleration, you see it utilizes NVIDIA hardware. I don't know if there's an I don't know if there's an AMD version. If there is, then you can use that. Otherwise, you'll have to use software. If you have the option for hardware, definitely definitely use that. And I'm going to change my profile to high. If you don't have a particularly powerful computer, again, leave it at main. I'm going to scroll down a bit more to bitrate settings. Here you have CBR or constant bitrate, VBR or variable bitrate, 1 pass, and variable bitrate, 2 pass. If you select the 2 pass, it'll give you the option of a target bitrate and a maximum bitrate. The 2 pass essentially means it's going to render it twice, and it just provides better quality at a lower file size. I'm just going to go with the 1 pass. You can use CBR if you really want to. I recommend using VBR though, especially for YouTube. And I'm going to set my target bitrate, because I'm at 1440p, to 50 megabits per second, because I'm at 1440p 60 fps. If you're at 1080p, you can set this to 25 or 30 with no issues. The lower this number, the less information each frame, and the lower the file size. You'll be able to see an estimated file size at the bottom here. So 54 megabytes. If I put this to 100, you'll see the estimated file size is doubled. So I'm going to put that back to 50. Scroll down a bit more. That's fine. Video is not VR. Audio tab, make sure it's AAC, 48,000 hertz. You don't need to go any lower than that, especially for YouTube. High audio quality, 320 kilobits per second. That's perfectly fine. Don't touch anything in the multiplexer, make sure it looks like that. Captions, you don't want those. And publishing settings, you're not going to use those because I would assume you want to upload them yourself. Ignore effects, because any effects you wanted to add, you should have added in your sequence and not in the renderer. And now at the bottom, use maximum render quality. Tick this if you have a powerful PC. If not, don't check it. I do have a powerful PC, so I'm going to keep it checked. And you don't need to check any of these unless you're rendering as a PNG sequence, then you may want alpha channels, but you don't need to worry about any of that for gaming montages. And then time interpolation. If you haven't done any time remapping or anything like that, just keep it at frame sampling. And that's exactly what I'm going to do for this edit. And finally, the 2 options you have are export, which will render it right now in Premiere Pro, or you have Q, which will add it to Adobe Media Encoder, which I mentioned earlier. And with Media Encoder, you could edit 3 or 4 videos, queue them all, and at the end of the day, render in Media Encoder, and it will render each one after each other sequentially while you're not using your PC. So you don't have to wait around if you don't want to, and you can do multiple videos in bulk. For me, I don't need to queue it, so I'm just going to export it here to show you the final product. So I'm going to click export, and you'll see it will render. Mine will probably be a bit faster than yours. So if yours isn't going that fast, it's typically because you're not doing a 5-second clip like I am, and you'll probably have more effects than I do. So now it's exported. I'm going to save my project in case I need to come back to it, and I'm going to close it. I'm going to navigate in my file explorer to where I have it saved, which is right here. You see tutorial MP4 file. In the properties, it's got all the settings that we set: 60 FPS, 2560 by 1440. You see the bitrate slightly different. That's because we use variable bitrate, so it's not going to be constant the whole time. Close this, and if I double click on the tutorial, we should have the edit that I just made. For the night, got me fucked up. Too bad bitches feeling right. I got dumb luck, big racks, no fucks. Get your money up, your baby want my baby, so I put it in a. And there you go, just like that. That is the basics to using Premiere Pro to make a gaming montage. I'm assuming your edit would be a lot longer than that, would have a distinct beginning and end. Mine was simply just to show you what's possible in a short YouTube video. Like I said before, now you know the basics of Premiere Pro. I recommend you check out all my other tutorials on Premiere Pro to learn some more effects for your montages. If you did enjoy this video and found it helpful, please leave a like on it, subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments any more tutorials you'd like to see. If you'd like a more advanced Premiere Pro tutorial going into things like nesting, time remapping, things like that, then do let me know and I will definitely make that. But other than that, join my Discord server, follow me on my social media, all the links will be down in the description. Peace out, and I'll catch you in the next video.